Well, let me ask you this, though, and I want to circle back around to some of the commercial buildings because I have some questions about that. But, like, I know on the East Coast, one of the alternatives that they're really, investing heavily in is offshore wind.
Yep.
And are they doing anything like that in the Gulf? I mean, because I know that there's a lot of hullabaloo around that. People are saying, like, it's affecting the whales, it's affecting the fisheries, and then there's people that are pushing back against that, saying, like, no, like, that's just your opinion. There's no, like, research or fact behind that. I mean, do you know about anything?
So there's pros and cons to offshore wind. One of the pros is that we tend to have a lot of wind offshore.
Right.
But what's the con? It's the base feasibility of doing the install, maintaining it, because you're having to disrupt a lot of ecosystems to put that in there. And then you're causing risk while the thing is running. You got birds that migrating and stuff, and it has to be far out enough, right? Like a offshore oil well, but those are built on floating platforms. This does not float, right? And you're running.
You got to put pylon in the ground.
Pylon and all, versus just taking what already has been built, like this building here that we could probably fit 2-3 megawatts on, which would be enough to run your homes for 5 years.
Right.
Okay. Let's start there so that we don't have to invest millions and millions of dollars more trying to put something where it never belonged in the first place, in the middle of the ocean, or never belonged in the first place. like plowing these fields of fertile, beautiful grassland and grazing land, and just putting solar fields out there that the utilities are owning, that the utilities are going to produce, take advantage of the tax credits, and pass the cost on to the consumer.
What I was going to ask about the commercial buildings is, I know one of the hang-ups with homeowners is, you can build a system, put a system on your home where you're going to have energy independence, right? But you're still going to have that grid charge.
Right.
Because either because that house was already connected or they require that you be connected.
Right.
Is that the same in the commercial space? I mean, or are some of these buildings big enough where they don't necessarily have to be tied into the grid?
So commercial definitely has to be tied into the grid. And the reason is because most commercial buildings have heavy equipment that they have to pull a certain amount of amperage in order to run those machines. So is
solar just not there as far as...
So here's what solar does. All solar does is produce the electricity, but you're talking about what's actually going to push that current, what's going to meet that load demand. So you're talking amps and not just voltages. So solar in and of itself is not going to produce the type of amps that are needed to run equipment. So that's where you have to have secondary, like batteries, and the batteries are getting better every single year. They're getting cheaper and they're getting more capable. And then it's the same thing with generators. So we're not just saying, just put solar panels everywhere. It's like, no, if you're a business that wants to be self-sustaining, you're going to have a combination of generation, of storage, like batteries, and then alternate generation, like a generator. Right? Because generators do a great job recharging batteries, because we have a lot of sun here, yes, but when those storm clouds move in, we could be cutting our production by 60-70%, and so we may not be able to keep up with the demand.
Which can happen for days.
It can happen for days, and so that's where you have the generator that just pops in. Instead of that generator running 24 hours a day, or just downright failing because, even though you've maintained it, it's still an engine. Right? Now you're only running it for 2-3 hours a day just to top off the batteries because maybe solar could not fully charge them, and then you're back in business.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because I'm beginning to notice a trend where businesses are not necessarily wanting to buy older buildings.
Right.
They're wanting to build their own, custom for their business, and I'm just wondering if it's more cost efficient to do it on the build side than it is on the retrofit side.
Really, not much. The only difference is this, and this also applies to residential construction as well. If you're building a house and you know that you want to put solar on it and you know that you want to have batteries and a generator, build me a beautiful A-frame. Build me a beautiful A-frame, like a barn dominium, where I could just put a single array at the perfect tilt to capture all that sun south-facing, and then we don't have to worry about trying to work around all these little nooks and crannies of your roof and sneak in a panel here and sneak in a panel there. And now we have, a loss of production because this panel's getting shade from this tree, but this panel's doing okay.
Right.
Same thing with businesses, except what we see more with businesses is we don't see the ornate roof complicated structures. We see flat roofs
yeah.
and A-frames all day long, right? Because those roofs were not necessarily designed for solar in mind, but they're standing 20, 25, 30 feet off the ground, and there's very little trees that are around. It's like the perfect opportunity.
Right. And does elevation have anything to do with it? I mean, like when you're talking about like a tall, skinny building,
Yeah.
you know?
You just want to get away from anything that could cast shade, right? So
Right.
if you're talking about buildings that are right next to each other and you have a 3-story building and a 1-story building, there's going to be some shade factors that we have to factor in on that. But looking at, is it easier to do a retrofit or new construction, really they're both pretty much the same. Now,
Right.
building codes are going to be different, so electrical wiring, maybe certain electrical panel upgrades would be needed, but that's minor. We're just talking about surface for solar panels, and then everything else just comes down to the wiring. And that's pretty standard amongst most commercial buildings.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the utility companies wanting to put them in fields rather than on buildings, is it for them? Is like a cost thing? Is it easier to?
It's a control thing.
It's a control thing.
So think of it this way: I could lease your roof space
Right.
and put solar on it, but now I don't own the structure that the solar panels are on, and I'm kind of leveraged by you at that point, right? And I'm kind of leveraged against you as well because that's my equipment on there, right? So it creates a relationship that isn't optimal for either parties. And so
Right.
when they go and buy land, that's their way of just owning the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right? They own what happens to it. They're able to control all the various environmental risk factors, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why they're also leasing the land, because these people are like, hey, I got land. It's not doing anything for me. Maybe it's right next to a substation. Yeah, I'll lease, 50 acres for, 50 years, and we'll just do it that way. But utilities want to have more ownership, more control, and they don't like to rely on anyone else, right? They want all of that control.
Yeah.